You know, Cathedral, you wonder why people don't trust you? Here is why people don't trust you. Did you see this thing yesterday, Carrie?
No.
I think it was yesterday. It's Wednesday. So during a COVID-19 vaccine at a press conference, this is in El Paso. Here you can see the thing here. Watch. Now, if you look at the plunger, it was already down. Then he like pulls it out a little bit, which is dangerous, and pretends to stick it in. And okay, it's done. So one of the nurses, this nurse here, was not actually vaccinated. The guy stuck the needle in him, but the plunger was already down. There was nothing in it. And said, and like pretended to vaccinate, and then just moved on to the next person. And I guess we're not supposed to ask any questions about it at all. Well, later they were like, oops, it was a mistake, and blah, blah, blah. And here's the thing that I don't understand. I would fire someone who did that. If you pick up a syringe and don't notice that the plunger's already down and stick it in someone and then flub around and pretend, you get fired. That's how diseases happen. That's how, I mean, what if it had been filled with air and they put the plunger down? Like, that's bad medical practice. And I know nothing about medicine, but I know enough to not do that. So I don't know. I mean, the other people appeared to get real vaccines, and they said they corrected it later and made sure the nurse was vaccinated. But I guess the whole thing that I find interesting about this is I sometimes wonder, the cathedral is sometimes just so, they lack so much self-awareness. They're like, why don't people trust us? And then they do this kind of stuff. And it's like, what do you mean, why don't we trust you? Look what you do. Did you see, in fact, did you see the New York Times? They had that audio unrelated, but related. They had that podcast called Caliphate. It won a Peabody Award. It was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. It was a finalist for a Pulitzer. And it turns out like their main person in it, who was this like alleged ISIS person, just made it up. It was just all made up. Just fabricated. And they're like, oops, we didn't fact check. We usually do, though. Sorry.
Did they take the award back?
No, but the New York Times did admit, oops, we made a mistake. My bad. There was a my bad article about it. They haven't I mean, I think Walter Duranty still had his Pulitzer still exists, right? His Pulitzer was never revoked.
Do you know? I watched a couple of episodes recently of this show called Manhunt. I've never seen it before. And season 2, I don't know what season 1 was about, but season 2 is about it's about what was his name? Rudolph, the bomber in 1996, 97, Eric Rudolph, who bombed the Olympics in Atlanta and a couple of abortion clinics and a gay nightclub. But it starts off, it's also about Richard Jewell. And I don't know if you remember Richard Jewell, but he was the security guard in Atlanta who discovered the bomb at the Olympics and saved the lives of hundreds of people and was lauded as a hero for a couple of days before the FBI decided to pin it on him, essentially, and leaked to the press that he was the bomber. And the press destroyed him, trial by media, destroyed his reputation through this hero. He wasn't the bomber. It was Eric Rudolph. But the FBI had him under this cloud of suspicion, and they worked with the media. And so this is a dramatization of that. But I went back and I looked at a lot of the facts because I watched like the first 3 episodes or something. And I wanted to see, because I remembered Richard Jewell's name and I couldn't remember what had happened to him. And so I'm looking it up now and I'm watching the show, and it's like, yeah, once again, you've got the deep state, or in this case, the FBI, working in collusion with the cathedral the legacy media, to ruin this innocent guy, ruin him. And not just an innocent guy, but a guy who was a hero, who, you know,
Right.
who, because he took his job seriously, because he was, as they called him, an overzealous security guard, he did the right thing when he saw this abandoned backpack and he called in the ATF. And
Right.
and who knows how many people, there were hundreds of people injured, and I think 1 or 2 died. But there could have been hundreds of people who died. And they dragged this guy through the mud, and they wanted to be able to open the Olympics back up. So we caught the guy, you know.
Oh, they needed this story, and he was the easiest.
Yeah.
I see.
And he was an easy guy to pin it on. And they kept him under a cloud of suspicion for like 88 days.
Which, by the way, puts a lot of other people's lives at risk because they didn't catch the guy. So the guy was still out there, and they just wanted to open up.
Right. They didn't catch the actual guy for like another year after he'd bombed some abortion clinics in a gay nightclub. And they also, what was I going to say about this guy? Oh, he ended up dying, very early death. He died at like 44 or something. And who knows how much the stress of all of that impacted him, but I'm sure it wasn't healthy for him to be sequestered in his house with media camped outside and everyone thinking that he's this bomber because the FBI decided to convict him in the media. Anyway, I'm just watching this with fresh eyes now, knowing what I know about the media and how they collude with deep state, and it just sort of, I don't know. The actor in it is very good, and there's one scene that made me cry. Oh, they brought him in. Get this. Because they correctly assessed that he's the type of guy who really looked up to and admired law enforcement. And when they first put him on the cameras as a hero in the show, they show him doing an interview that aired on CNN, and he's not cut out for media attention. You know, in the dramatization, he's like sweating bullets and he's nervous, and he's also very humble. He's like, I'm not the real hero. The cops are the real hero. The cops who listen to me, whatever. And then he says, you know, I'm looking for a job at a precinct. Like, basically he wants to become a cop. And I think people aren't used to seeing a real, honest, good guy like this guy who's actually humble. If you're not humble and you see that in someone else, and if you're the kind of person who fakes being humble, then of course you're going to think he's faking that, right? I don't trust him. He must have set the bomb, right?
Right, because
who would be that humble? Yeah, because you would be faking it. And so they go after him shortly after that interview. But I'm losing. Why am I spacing today? Anyway,
who knows?
The
fan noise. Blame the fan.
Okay, so he wasn't. So this is what the FBI did to him. They correctly assessed that he was the kind of guy who wanted to work in law enforcement and looked up to law enforcement. Instead of telling him that they were questioning him as a suspect, they brought him in under the false pretense of, hey, we want to get your advice as a colleague and they have him, and they have the scene where he's sitting there and they're asking him, you know, that we're going to record this for training purposes. You know, maybe you can help us figure out who the bomber is. So what do you think if you were the bomber, what's the bomber thinking right now? And he's like, well, I guess the bomber, I'd be thinking, you know, and they're getting him to voice this stuff as if he's the bomber. And I looked this up to see how much of this was factual. They actually, instead of reading him his Miranda rights, they said, if this were real, if you were a suspect, we would read you these rights now. We're going to read them on camera for a training exercise, and we're going to have you sign this waiver. Yeah. Yes. And there's one part during that scene where he starts to realize he asked them, oh my gosh, bless his heart. This actor's really good. He's like, is this a real, he starts to figure it out. He's like, is this a real interview? And they're like, no, come on, Richard, no. We're just trying to get advice from you. We'll give you a letter of recommendation from the FBI for those police jobs you want if you help us with this training exercise. And he starts to cry, and he's like, do you think I could do this to people? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it tugged at my heartstrings. This is what I mean about like people. We need to get better at telling these kinds of stories with emotion. Take these real events of what happened. This was a great dramatization. And apparently there's a movie about it that Clint Eastwood made called Richard Jewell. I've never seen it, but I want to see it now. But
How many FBI people? So yes, the media is horrible, but how many FBI people were fired and prosecuted as a
right.
result? No, I'm asking any.
I don't think there were any repercussions. I read that at some point Janet Reno in a Q&A with press basically that I don't think they ever issued a formal apology, but she said, yeah, I'm sorry that we did that we leaked that info to the press about him and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the problems with these police state bureaucracies is there's never any accountability for these people. They get away with this stuff. I mean, look at what they've done during Trump's presidency with this Russia crap. No one's like,
they haven't fired anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. A couple people are not like Peter Strzok's not there anymore, is he? Maybe.
Oh, right.
Like, but they're not. No one's prosecuted. No one gets in trouble. Like, there's no real consequences for anyone. It's just there's no accountability. There's no accountability. And I used to think that probably like most people, that if the FBI ever called me in for helping them with something real, like there's a bomber or a murderer, you might have been there and saw something, like, can you come in and talk to us? I assumed that I would be a good citizen and be like, yeah, sure. Like, I'll come tell you what. Not now. Not after watching what they've done with the Trump allies. I will never speak to them about anything. I won't help them solve legitimate crimes. I won't open my mouth. I'm not talking to them. I don't trust them. They have completely lost the trust of regular people, and they deserve to lose the trust of regular people.
Yeah.
And they do this kind of crap over and over again. This is what, the late 90s? And
yeah, this is like
here
96.
we are 20 years later, and nothing's changed, except for there might be less accountability than there was 20 years ago. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to even cooperate at all.